today's question and answer portion for the GIC Talk. If you didn't get a piece of paper when you came in, please raise your hand and one of our volunteers will make sure that you get a piece of paper. And please make sure your questions are written on the paper. They'll be passed up to me and I'll address the questions to today's speaker. So first off, Ambassador Danielsson, you mentioned that you've been ambassador to Korea since September of 2011. Can you tell us a little bit about how you became ambassador to Korea and maybe some of your stops in your career along the way?
Well, I became ambassador to Korea because I wanted to. You know, we have a system where you can actually apply. And it's not just some anonymous government to decide, you go there and you go there and you go there. I started out many, many years ago as a student of the Chinese language. I have a background working at our embassy in Beijing and also most recently as a consul general in Hong Kong. I also studied at the Beijing Daxue. So I have a background in this part of the world. I visited Pyongyang before I visited Seoul in 1982. So I always thought that being able to know more about this country would be something that would be tremendously satisfactory for my own professional life. Now, my problem was that I spent almost 15 years working for two prime ministers as something which we call state secretary, which is basically vice minister in the prime minister's office. So I was prevented from coming to Korea earlier than I would have wanted to. But now, when I've been here for 4 years, and unfortunately I will be leaving here in August, I realize why I wanted to come. We are one of the few, maybe the only one, who actually have an honorary consul here. Professor Yang, who's sitting right there in a yellow t-shirt. And he has helped me to provide a lot of information about Gwangju. I know, of course, your importance in contemporary Korean history. I know every time May 18 happens, I know what this means. I know what this means for you. I know that this is, in many sense, the cradle of Korean modern democracy. I also know your past history, which is also both rich and wonderful. I think it is extremely important for any ambassador, and I'm trying to follow that, not to stay too much in the capital. Seoul is a great city, yes. Too much traffic, but basically a great city. But it is very important, I think, if you are to understand fully this country, you have to see its various parts. And of course, Chola and Gwangju are very important elements in trying to understand this country.
So moving on to your duties as ambassador, can you talk about what you spend most of your time doing as ambassador? And as a side question, what kind of issues do Koreans seek you out about advice on most regularly?
I do a lot of this, what I do now. I think this is a very important part of my work, to try to talk about my own country and try to answer all those questions, because the most questions I get are, please explain the Swedish welfare system. How have you done? This is by far the most important, the most common question I get. This is why I so much cherish these opportunities to try to shed some light. What I also do, which is a little bit unusual, I spend a lot of time in Sweden talking about Korea. Maybe that's mainly the task of the Korean ambassador in Sweden, and he does a very good job. But what I have strongly felt since I came here is that there is too much of ignorance in Sweden about this great country, about the possibilities, about the challenges of this great country. We need more Swedes to visit this country. We need Swedes to understand more what's happening here. I mean, we have traditionally known a lot about China. We also know quite a bit about Japan, but too little about Korea. So I'm considering whether I should send the bill for half my salary to the Korean government instead of the Swedish government, because I'm trying to sort of work for both ways. And in my mind, that is exactly what an ambassador should do. I'm mainly here for Sweden and Korea, but I'm also for Korea and Sweden. The last point one area which I haven't talked about at all, which I devote a lot of time to, has to do, of course, with the northern part of this peninsula. Sweden is one of the few countries that has a diplomatic representation also in Pyongyang. And we happen to also, in addition to taking care of our own business in North Korea, we also take care of the business of the United States, since the U.S. does not have diplomatic relations. So we are what is called protective power for the United States in North Korea. And that gives also me a lot of work in South Korea. So I'm in, I would say, almost, if not daily, at least weekly contact with my American colleague, Ambassador Lars at the U.S. Embassy, to discuss various aspects of North Korea.
Okay, moving on to some of the specifics. One of the audience members points out that Korea actually ranks rather low on the scale of work efficiency due to work culture that requires long hours. And so can you tell us some of your thoughts about the comparison in work productivity between the two systems?
Well, I'm not sure I agree with that. I think you're too humble when it comes, or too harsh on your own country, perhaps with that question. Because if I mean, it's very clear. If you look at the number of hours worked, this country is, if not number one, I think Mexico is actually number one among OECD countries. But Korea is number two, 2,300 something per year. Whereas my own country has 1,765 hours a week, which is very high in Europe, but 25% less than Korea. Does this mean that you only work long hours and you're not efficient? I'm not so sure about it. I think there is a little bit in your hierarchical structure that makes it inefficient. Because if you have a more flat kind of organization, you can normally take decisions quicker. But on the other hand, I have, for example, looked at, since Sweden also is a car manufacturing country, I have looked, for example, at the productivity in the Hyundai factory in U.S.A. compared to the Volvo factory in Gothenburg, Sweden. A worker in U.S.A. has a higher salary, produces 20% more than his Swedish colleague. So productivity, I think, don't be too humble, don't be too bashful. I think that this country, comparatively speaking, is very efficient also. There are things that can be improved, which has to do, in my mind, with your rather hierarchical structure in many organizations and many companies. Yes. But other than that, we're doing well, in my mind.
Okay, moving on to larger issues that can affect the welfare system. Several audience members have brought up the topic of immigration. So how does immigration, both legal and illegal, affect the welfare system in Sweden? And is immigration a threat to the model?
Basically, no, it's not a threat to the model. Let me just give you some facts here. Sweden, together with Germany, is the country in Europe, in absolute terms, who receives the most immigrants and refugees right now. Last year, alone from Syria, 80,000 Syrians came to our country. The UK had 1,500. And this has been going on for quite some time. This is because we have traditionally had a policy where we, for humanitarian reasons, want to keep our doors as open as possible for those who need to seek refuge. Now this means that those who come to Sweden, to a very large extent, do not come to Sweden because they want to work or because they want to look for work. They come because they're fleeing from something. And we have chosen to share at least a little bit of our prosperity with those people, which I think basically is good. But that, of course, also creates some problems, yes. Because I talked earlier about the cornerstones of our system, and they are, in a sense, very Swedish. I mean, they are based on our traditions, on our religion and everything else. And of course, it's quite natural that if you come from Afghanistan or if you come from Somalia, you may not have those exact same traditions with you. You may have some different traditions. So honestly, and I should maybe have spoken about this already in my introduction, we have not been as successful as I want us to be when it comes to integrating those who come from other countries in our own. There is too much unemployment, there is too much segregation between ethnic groups. We are working on it. We're working to try to have people learn Swedish or learn at least English, to get the kind of job training they need to be able to work, because we need people. And Sweden has 10 million people in an area which is 5 times larger than South Korea. So basically, we need everyone. If you want to move to Sweden, please tell me and I will welcome you. We need more people. But of course, when you have a situation where most of those who come from other countries to Sweden do not come because they want to come to Sweden, but they come to us because they want to leave their own country, then you get some problems for the system. I think we can handle it. If we are better, we can handle it. But for the past 4 or 5 years, there's been some problems, yes, absolutely. And what has happened in our politics is that we've had consensus about our generosity when it comes to receiving immigrants from other countries, but we're now having a small extreme right party, which is now about 12% of the electorate, who says we should stop immigration. This is not typical for Sweden. You would find it in most European countries, but we haven't had this before. Now we have it. And that's, of course, a signal also to those more responsible political forces that we have to get better at integrating those who come from countries.
Many of the problems you're talking about have a political element to them. We've had several questions from the audience that have addressed specific points about politics. Could you please speak briefly about the relative absence or presence of corruption and dishonesty between the two systems, and also the role that participation across political parties plays within the system?
I think one of the biggest obstacles to build trust is if you have corruption. Because if there is corruption, you will not have trust. That's a sort of a given. How do you get rid of corruption? Well, partly you get rid of corruption when society becomes richer, prosperous, because there is not the same need. But then, of course, some people say that there are human beings who always are greedy, and that they are greedy regardless of the level of income of the country. I think that in order to do what we have done, in order to deal with corruption, you have to start with the political sphere. Corruption will also exist in the private sector, and we have some corruption in the private sector in Sweden as well, although it's quite negligible. But we basically have no corruption in the political sphere. And why is that? Well, because we have tried to create a system where politicians should not be here and people here. Politicians should not be too well paid. They should not have too much of various benefits in the form of car and driver and free apartments and things like that. But they should, as much as possible, be living on conditions which are relatively similar to ordinary people. If you want to be a politician, you should be a politician not because you want to earn money, then you should do something else. You should want to be a politician because you want to change society one way or the other. And we've been relatively successful with that. It also has to do with the transparency. I mean, if you have a high level of transparency, you will not have that much of corruption. And that's also another last very, very important point, which I have suggested lasted to your president actually, is that some 20 years ago, we changed the system on how political parties are being financed. Today, you cannot give private contributions up over a certain level to political parties. Political parties are financed over the taxpayers' money. So we have a public financing system of the political parties, where parties are given funds according to how many seats they have in parliament, in regional government, and local government. If I look at many of the corruption cases I see in the political sphere in Korea, they're almost always related to election campaigns. People want money to commit people. Now, if you take away that by putting strict limits, and also by instituting a public system, you can get rid of a lot of the corruption. It's not enough. You also have to change the mindset, yes. But I think this for us has worked very, very well. Sometimes it's criticized by people saying, why should we pay taxpayers' money to political parties? Well, because if we don't, we get a much worse system. So I think this has been quite successful for us, and this is also a matter which I think maybe could be a discussion in this country, whether you could introduce elements of this publicly financed party.
So you just mentioned one aspect that Korea could adopt from this system. I think we have time for just two more questions. So they're both going to deal with Korea and the Nordic system, the Swedish system. First of all, you said that you're not here to preach and tell Korea what they should do. However, you did say specifically that Korea shouldn't copy the Swedish model. Could you give a few specific reasons that would lead you to say something that definitive?
Well, because every country is different. Every country should form its future based on its own history, its own experience, and its own people. And even though I find many similarities between Sweden and Korea, many similarities between Sweden and Korea as a country, more than I would have thought before I came here, I also still see that we have different history. So this is why we should be very careful. I should be very careful to say to you, take the Swedish system. And you should be careful to say to me, take the Korean system. What I always want to do in my next life is to form a new country where I take the best from Korea, the best from Sweden. Wow, we will conquer the world. Because there are so many great things in this country. We have a number of great things. You are good at things that we are not good at, and vice versa. So together, the rest of the world, watch out. But that will be my next slide.
We have time for just one more question. This talk, of course, generated lots of good questions, and I'm sorry I couldn't ask all of your questions. However, the ambassador seems like a pretty nice enough fellow. So maybe after the talk, if you feel passionate about something that I didn't get a chance to ask him, please feel free to come up and talk to him directly after the talk. So, Ambassador, you actually led right into my last question with your dream world of combining Korea and the Swedish system. So, just to wrap up, could you briefly tell us what can Sweden learn from Korea?
Many things. Your ability to be considerate, your ability to take care of each other, your ability to be very straightforward. This is something which most Europeans don't. We always think that most people living in Northeast Asia are very they don't say what they think. But what I love about Korea, and which I would love to see more of in my own country, is this straightforwardness that you have. If you see a problem, you say, this is not good, this is something we want to do. I would like that Sweden would learn more of your work ethics. You probably work too much. Yes, you probably, at least students study too much, that's for sure. But I would love to have at least some of that to my own country. I would love to have the safety of the society in the sense that you never have to worry when you walk in the streets in Korea, in Gwangju or Seoul or Busan or whatever. Because this is a safe country in the sense that people care for each other as much, and that you don't have this, which is so common in Europe, this element of unprovoked violence which we see too much. You don't see that. There are many other things. But what I mainly, of course, would like to bring, and I brought some with already, is of course the Korean food.
Well, I think we can all agree with that. That's all the time we have for the Q&A portion today. Let's give the ambassador one more round of applause for answering our questions.